The fog is lifting. Clarity is calling you forward. Welcome to Forward in Freedom. I'm Tanya Johnson. This is where awareness becomes power. Let's move forward in freedom.
Freedom doesn't just remove what hurt you, it requires you to become someone new. And that's the part people don't always talk about because leaving what harmed you is one thing, but living as the version of yourself who no longer tolerates it, that's where the real work begins. I am Tanya J, your host for Forward in Freedom, where we move from fog to freedom. And this is the work of walking free. In episode 8, we talked about what happens when clarity arrives, how your body knows before your mind, how truth begins whispering, how your tolerance for chaos quietly shrinks. Today, we go deeper because what comes after awareness is renegotiation, identity shifts, relational friction, and the uncomfortable realization that some connections cannot travel with the person you are becoming. This episode is for the listener who keeps asking, why does this feel harder now that I'm healthier? Why am I being treated differently? Why do I feel lonely even though I'm finally free? Let's talk about that. When you stop functioning the same way, the system around you notices. Not always kindly. In high intensity or emotionally unpredictable relationships, stability is often built on imbalance. One person regulates, one person absorbs, one person smooths, one person adapts. When you stop doing those things, the relationship loses its structure. Not because you become difficult, but because the connection was built on you carrying what was never meant to be yours. Some relationships collapse not because you changed, but because you stopped compensating. When clarity enters, certain dynamics become impossible to maintain. You don't argue as much, you don't over explain, you don't chase resolution, you don't rescue discomfort. And suddenly you're called cold, distant, difficult, selfish. What changed? Your nervous system stopped volunteering for chaos. And that's usually the moment guilt shows up. Guilt after growth is common, not because you're wrong, but because your identity is reorganizing. You're no longer oriented around pleasing. You're no longer living in reaction mode. You're no longer shrinking to keep peace. And for people who benefited from the old version of you, that feels threatening. You didn't betray them, you evolved. Guilt often appears when your boundaries interrupt someone else's access. This is where many people panic and reverse course. They soften their limits, they re enter old conversations, they explain themselves back into exhaustion. Shrink. Not because they want to, but because unfamiliar ground can feel unsafe, even when it's finally stable. Let me slow this down and speak from lived truth, not theory. Let me share this from the other side of survival, not from inside it. From the place where your nervous system finally stops bracing. From the moment you realize you're no longer organizing your life around someone else's volatility. From the day you're breathing deepens because your choices are your own. There was a time when my life revolved around managing someone else's emotions, anticipating reactions, editing my tone, choosing peace over honesty. I confused endurance for love, loyalty for self abandonment. And I learned something crucial. Sometimes what feels like guilt isn't conviction, it's grief. Grief over the person you were required to be, grief over the hope you kept extending, grief over a connection that only functioned when you stayed small. For me, the ache wasn't about losing something healthy, it was about finally releasing someone who never intended to grow with me. Choosing myself looked like grief, but it was actually freedom. Hope that keeps you stuck is not God's hope. Real hope is never on a hook. Healing often disappoints the version of people who benefited from your pain. And that truth is what opened my life. When that shift happens inside you, relationships either recalibrate or reveal. In volatile or imbalanced dynamics, sustainability often depends on one person staying flexible. When that stops, the system strains. Not because you failed, but because the relationship was structurally fragile, dependent on you absorbing instability. It becomes unsustainable, dysregulated, out of alignment, and growth exposes what accommodation concealed. Some bonds only survive when one person keeps shrinking. You are not obligated to remain compatible with dysfunction. You are allowed to become incompatible with patterns that erode you. So, what do you do when you've changed, but the world around you hasn't caught up yet? This is where practice matters. Rebuilding isn't dramatic, it's daily. It's how you schedule your time, how you answer your messages, how quickly you explain, how often you override your instincts. And here are three ways to live your freedom, not just analyze it. Your freedom nugget today is one, delay instant compliance. You don't owe urgency to every request. Two, let patterns, not promises, guide access to you. Three, protect what steadies you, even when no one applauds. Freedom shows up when you no longer rush to justify. Before we talk about sharing this episode or what's coming up next, I want to anchor you in something steady. If you if you're grieving people while gaining yourself, you're not broken. You are reorganizing. If relationships feel strained, it doesn't mean you chose wrong. It may mean you finally chose honestly. Freedom is not loud at first, it's quiet, stable, unreactive, rooted, and over time, it becomes unmistakable. If this episode met you in a tender place, share it with someone who's trying to stay brave in the middle of change. Subscribe so you don't miss where we're headed next. Next week, we're talking about something rarely discussed. What do you do when people don't celebrate your growth? And how to stay grounded when your transformation makes others uncomfortable. I'm grateful you showed up for yourself today. This is Tanya J, your host for Forward in Freedom. where we move from fog to freedom. And this is the work of walking free. Until next time, walk forward with clarity.